Hey guys, it's Judy from Nutrition with Judy. Thanks for joining me today. While you're here, please make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening to this on podcast, please make sure to leave a review as this allows my content to get in front of more people. My name is Judy Cho and I am board certified in holistic nutrition. I focus on root cause healing, and oftentimes that starts with the Carnivore Cures meat only elimination diet. Okay, so today is part 2 of the conversation with Dr. Gary Fettke. If you missed the first one, make sure to check it out. We talk about how all of the dietetic recommendations, how hospitals, how our medical guidelines have kind of come about, and why we believe that plant-based is supposed to be healthy for us, or where the origins of that came from. In part 2, Dr. Gary Fettke and I talk about fructose, and that's the bulk of the conversation, but we also talk about what is ideal eating and what is individualized care, and what he recommends for people that have been blessed and had the opportunity to learn this information that can improve their own health. One thing that Dr. Gary Fettke brought up that has really stayed with me is that the people that have been able to hear this information about low carb have experienced the benefits of keto and a carnivore diet. We are truly privileged. There's a lot of people that don't have access to these foods or don't have the ability to get this type of information. And when he talks about that, you have the privilege, and then from there, what do you do with that privilege? It made me really think that we really are blessed to even have this information, that we can even share this information and have this grassroots movement. I hope that if you have healed from this way of eating, that you would really consider sharing with your loved ones and sharing why you've healed with diet as a big part of it, because this is how we can save our loved ones and maybe have a better life. If you eat a meat-only diet and have been adding fructose to your regimen of meats, I highly recommend listening to this conversation. Dr. Gary Fettke talks about the risk of having too much fructose, what is too much fructose, and what may be safe or not in a day's worth of eating. Everything will be individualized, but if you do add fructose, you may just want to take close attention to this episode. Okay, let's get right into it. Our community, the meat-based community, they have been focusing a little bit about adding possible fruits and honey. And for some people, they say they have a burst of energy. And now that they are adding carbs to their diet, they feel so much better. Maybe they sleep better. Maybe their hormones are better. But then there's also the population that, as we just talked about, maybe they struggled with metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance. And so adding that honey then maybe triggered some of the cravings and caused them to end up eating other carby processed foods, but also some of them, the fruits, and eating maybe one or two fruits per meal, and then maybe snacking on some berries tips them enough to become more insulin resistant again. Can you talk a little bit about fructose, why you're not a big fan of fructose?
For me, I used to be metabolically unwell. So therefore, looking at the biochemistry, if glucose is glucose, so sugar is glucose and fructose, 50-50. And then all complex carbohydrates are combinations of glucose and then you've got some other things which are glucose and fructose and maltose, but essentially that ultimately becomes either glucose or fructose. If you're metabolically unwell, overweight, insulin resistant, 30% of the glucose you eat will be converted to fructose. This thing called the polyol pathway.
Yes.
That was eye-opening. Richard Johnson's done a lot of work on that. So glucose has its side effects. As I come back and say, there it is. I think 4 grams starts having a negative effect on the system with our glycocalyx within the blood vessels, a nitric oxide effect, as well as an insulin effect. That's a simple term. Fructose has similar issues, metabolic. It tends to be the driver of behavior. But we actually don't need it in our diet. So I've actually gone and travelled to visit Loch Tappy and ask him publicly. It was in a Coca-Cola meeting, by the way, which didn't go down well. I said, "Look, Professor Tappy, you're the fellow who's described the final metabolism of fructose." And I said, "Is there a human biochemical requirement for the ingestion of fructose?" And I knew the answer. He knew the answer. I'd actually pre-warned him over lunch that I was going to ask him publicly. And he said, "No." So there's no human requirement biochemically for fructose. It has a negative impact on the system. It has a liver effect. It has a nitric oxide effect, and the nitric oxide is critical for our blood pressure, our brain circulation, and our immune system. Fructose gets converted by the aldehyde pathway into alcohol metabolites.
Right.
So it's like that's one of the causes of the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. When you have too much over a period of time, the body doesn't know what to do with it, so it gets converted ultimately into intrahepatic fat. It also has a anti-leptin effect. So that leptin is the hormone secreted by fat to tell us you've eaten enough. So it has this negative feedback loop to say actually you're still hungry. It has a positive ghrelin effect. So ghrelin is that hormone released by the stomach to give you this stomach grumbling. So it has an effect there on actually making us hungry. And remind me to come back to cake and parties in a second, okay? So, and it has an insulin resistant effect on our muscle. So fructose by itself has these effects which are well known now. So you've got to work out what fructose is in nature. So fructose in nature comes in fruit primarily, because in the vast majority, as if we're in the animal kingdom, we're just animals as humans. The only time you had access to fructose was from fruit. So at the time of plenty, when fruit was becoming seasonally available, which is spring, summer, autumn, it was the time to eat as much of it as you can so you get fat for winter hibernation. And there's, we've got, animals on a tree, possums here in Australia, will strip a fruit tree bare just before we want to eat it. Because there's no way they can possibly eat that amount of fruit unless there's something driving behavior. Right. So that turns out to be fructose largely. So if we look at the effect of fructose there drives behavior. Now, if you want to eat some fruit, now I have a few berries at night, but I'll have them at night mixed up with a granola, a nut granola and cream. That's my dessert if I want it. But I know that those 3 berries I don't have a handful, I have 3. Sometimes I blow it out and have 4 if they're small. I'm a big addict. But I know that if I get hungry for the next 12 hours, I'm going to be asleep. Sure. Well, not asleep, but I'm not going to be able to go. Whereas if I was to go and eat fruit at the beginning of the day, then I know it will drive behavior. So if you want to have fruit in your diet because you're addicted, okay, so if you want honey in your diet because you're addicted, because you don't biochemically require it, and it does give you a bit of a high, that sugar high, that's what happens at kids' parties, they get high. So let's accept the fact that you're not having the sugar, you're not having the honey, the fruit. I know the people who are talking about it. Let's accept you're not having it for biochemistry because you're having it because you're addicted to the high. I'm not being critical, so that's accept that. Then that's where the biochemistry is. Do you absolutely need it? No, but you might need the high. You might feel the surge of energy. I actually don't think it's a surge of energy as much as it's a feeling of elation and behavioral change. So, but you can get the same high without actually eating it. Now, here's a challenge though. So you can do this with, if you're trying to, taste is mostly smell. So you can do the experiment. You can get a lolly or a piece of fruit, block your nose. If this is on audio, nobody's seen me block my nose. And you put the lolly in your mouth and you wait for that taste of sugar to hit, that sweetness. You wait, it's a couple of seconds. Then release your nose. Then there's an enormous wave of sweetness hits the brain because it goes up the olfactory nerve. And anybody who's got a cold, the food doesn't taste any good. Right. So therefore, we all know this, but that's the way you do the experiment. So if you really want to actually have cake, and I've done this, I do this as an experiment in the theatre tea room. I'll say, okay, let's just smell the cake. Don't eat it. So literally the cake's sitting there and just go and smell it. And you get that smell in. And what's really interesting is you do smell the sweetness. Right. It goes up to the olfactory nerve, to the nucleus accumbens, which is the addiction center of the brain. And you get the chemical hit on the brain. And then you keep smelling it and the sweetness goes away. It's a bit like if you actually keep eating something, you can do a taste test. Mm-hmm. You get the first taste, you put some food in your mouth. Wow. Okay. Then you have wait a minute, and then have a second piece of exactly the same. It's not as much of a wow. Third piece. And by the fourth piece, it actually doesn't have a taste at all. So you can do the same thing. So when you have, one block of chocolate, which then one piece of chocolate, which then goes to 10, you're actually getting no taste benefit. Yes. After the first couple. It's purely addiction. So you can do the same thing with smelling cake. So I know it looks bizarre to everyone. I actually wanted for our daughter's wedding that we actually just buy one cupcake for the 80 people that came along, and everyone could just sniff the cake. I got outvoted, but she did actually have a cheesecake, literally made of cheeses. So that was to please Dad, and there was a cake on the side to please the masses. But what I'm sort of saying is, if there's no human biochemical requirement for our health to have fructose, then we don't need it. So there's got to be another reason, and Sure. The reason is fructose drives behaviour. and it makes you, it gives you your treat. And if you think you're having a treat in nature, and that's what fruit is, there's a talk of mine on YouTube called "Is Fruit Good or Bad for You?" And again, it was an academic argument about is fruit good or bad. It was a debate, and I turned it into a talk ultimately. But the guy I was debating against, he was a professor of nutrition, and he actually conceded defeat halfway through my talk when I brought religion into the equation again. I don't keep coming back to it, but I did think it was quite funny that God was trying to tell us that fruit was bad for us because the original sin was don't eat the fruit. Don't eat that apple, don't eat the fruit off the tree. So God was pretty well wise to it right at the beginning of Genesis. So I respect that. And so people, and if it means that you're eating well 90% of the time and you're having a little bit of it and you've improved your metabolic health, it's probably not going to do an enormous amount of harm. People are, unbelievable. The human body can tolerate the irritants that are found in the glutens in grain, the lectins, the pectins. The body is, and it can tolerate fructose. And if you're actually eating fructose like an animal, which in season with exposure to sunlight, because sunlight's really important, vitamin D in the metabolism of the in the cleaning up of the metabolites of fructose. Again, that's in one of my sugar and inflammation talks. If you're going to eat it, have it in season. Maybe we should all eat fruit in the middle of the day, totally naked outside, so there's plenty of sunlight coming in. But understand that when you eat it, it's going to make you hungry for the next few hours. That's okay. Like my grandchildren have some fruit and they're metabolically agile and can do that. But once you've developed a metabolic poor health, then those things are the things which might tip you back into bad eating ways, might tip you back into the insulin resistant state. And again, not everyone's perfect and you can have breakouts but again, if we're all on this journey towards better health, then I think the very first step is about what you fuel yourself with rather than what you medicate yourself with. And that's about information. And then people have got to work out whether or not what you and I are talking about, whether or not it is part of misinformation, disinformation. I keep coming back to biochemistry. Here's the biochemistry. I respect you can do whatever you want with your food. You can eat whatever you want. If there's an option for you to improve your outcome without me operating on you or without me writing out a medication for you, then why wouldn't you try it?
Yes, I think that's really powerful. I had a quick question. So when you were saying about smelling the cake and how you will smell the sweet, and then when you keep smelling it, it won't smell as sweet. Are you saying that if you crave something sweet, if you were to smell it, can it possibly take away that craving, you think, by just smelling?
I think so. It can for me because I like playing mind games with myself. So you smell it and you get the chemical hit.
Right.
B, you've got, wow, I've just had the chemical hit. C, I've just had the chemical hit without a single calorie coming in. And so the food's been trying to trick me and I've outsmarted it.
I got to try it.
It's a mind game.
Right.
And I don't mean that everyone walks around with a bit of cake shoved up their nose, but do the experiment because it's actually, because we're about educating others. Doctor, the definition, Latin meaning of doctor?
No.
Well, it's not, it's to teach. A doctorate is a teacher. So I'm not we're not supposed to be operator or medicator or carer or healer. I'm supposed to be a teacher. So if you can teach someone, and yes, you might need to use some theatre in that. And so you're using a bit of theatre by actually shoving a bit of cake up your nose. Everyone goes, oh, he's crazy. It gets people thinking.
Sure.
Or you do the experiment with that bit of sweetness in your mouth. It's just do the experiment.
Right.
Do it to yourself. Because this is individualised healthcare. It may not work for you, but guess what? It will. It's creating that experience to get the message across. And then culturally, we need to think about having different ways of celebrating. Kids that go to a kids' park. I can know that one of the people who used to work with us, when her kids would turn up to a party, they get a lolly bag at the end of the party to take home. The deal was whenever the kids got in the car, the mum would give them a little couple of pieces of Lego. She'd swap the lolly bag for the Lego bag. So the kids in that house, look, our grandson's 4, and he goes to a party, but he's the kid that actually doesn't eat the garbage food. Doesn't like it. So have we socially isolated him? No, he's a good kid and he seems to be functioning well amongst his peers. But the great thing now in a classroom, the kid who doesn't have sugar is not alone. I don't know if it's happening the same thing in the US. It used to be that that kid that wasn't allowed sugar and was the alone kid. Now there's 2 or 3 kids in the classroom. Yes. That's a win.
Yes.
That your child does not need to be isolated, because every kid's got allergies. You're not allowed to have this or that or whatever. So it's normal to say, okay, I'm not going to have, my kid's not going to be eating cakes it's interesting times, particularly
Yes.
challenging for parents.
So with my son, he goes to a preschool, and the lunches, so the snack and lunch are supposed to be brought in. And so there's no carbs, or almost no carbs. And so I sometimes share my kids' lunch on my Instagram stories, and people ask me, does your child feel isolated? And I've asked them, and it's so normalized in our family now to just eat very low carb. And I've asked them, and they've never felt any different. The one time was when my oldest son would take liver pate or pork rinds, and then as soon as he opened the lunch, it would have a strong stench. But other than that, no one's ever said, how come you don't have any carbs or apples, or how come you don't have any crackers? They don't really get that. I mean, they eat a lot of meat, and I mean, they've embraced it. I haven't seen them feel isolated for that. I think they've felt a little bit more isolated in the pandemic. I'm okay listening to the rules, but for my children, I was not for them wearing masks, for example. And so they were more isolated from that than having them eat more meat-based. So it is interesting times, absolutely.
They're going back, I think, to the 1920s. And there was a study on 3 or 4 orphaned babies.
Mm-hmm.
They were all boys, actually, and they were put, and somewhere around about a year of age. The study can never be done again, but they just put the child on with a tray of food with 20 different raw foods and different foods in front of them, and every child tended to avoid all the processed stuff, ate the raw meats, all of that sort of thing. They ate to their nutritional requirements as innate behavior. You can't do that experiment ever again. I've got the paper somewhere. It's a fascinating story of watching babies eat what they required. So, without any external influence, they were just given a choice, 20 food materials or so per meal, and the children all ended up healthy. And like the youngest one, she's 20 months now and talking, but she'll actually, here's a proud moment as a grandfather, because I'll give her beef biltong, and her time with me is she'll sit with me, and she'll, rather than say sometimes with Oompa, she went through a month or two where she'd just come up to me and go, beef. So that the one, she just, said, Oompa will give me meat. So she just comes along and just goes, beef. So have I brainwashed our granddaughter? Probably. Okay.
I love it. And it's a great fuel for her growing brain. Question. So, you just mentioned that everyone will be individual. Maybe your grandchildren, because they're more metabolically flexible, maybe they can tolerate a little bit of fructose. Would you be supportive if your grandchildren were to eat fruit multiple times a day, even though they're metabolically healthy?
Oh, no, I'll disinherit them completely. They can do what they want at the moment.
Sure.
They don't have an income, so their food's determine what their mother buys for them. Again, if the thing is, you can get away with all of this.
Right. I guess that's the question.
Decades.
If we know that there's a certain amount that's toxic, so let's say for glucose, it's 4 grams, and fructose, I've heard that it's 20 grams throughout the whole day. A mango is like 35 grams of fructose. So that means you can
fructose, it might, in my take on it, it's probably 1 gram. It's any fructose has, by my definition, has a negative impact. Okay. It starts affecting nitric oxide at any intake.
Okay.
And nitric oxide is critical. So therefore, fructose has its side effects, but it came at the benefit of making us fat for winter.
Sure. Okay.
So it was a price we could afford to pay in our evolution for a month or two, or even probably only a week or two in the overall spectrum of the year. And the body can repair itself. The glycocalyx can repair itself. You can only get a certain amount of fat and then you actually burn it off again. If you're not insulin resistant for the entire 12 months, it's okay. I was just listening to a program yesterday, the day before in the car. There's an argument now that dementia has its origins in childhood. So when you start looking at the vascular damage done by carbohydrates and seed oils, we didn't get onto them today, but nonetheless, that combination, then maybe the damage is starting to occur in childhood.
Right.
And because the body is so incredibly resistant to it and so strong and biologically diverse and can cope with it, it's not manifested until 70 or 80 years down the track. So if my grandchildren want to eat fruit every day, okay, here's an interesting one. Again, if we just have fructose in our diet, that'd probably be okay. It's when you combine byproducts of that, which are the small dense LDL products, the lipoproteins, and you combine that with the polyunsaturated oils, that's probably harmful.
Mhm.
Or if you had a diet just of polyunsaturated oils, and without fructose, you might get away with that too. But the trouble is, the half-life of a polyunsaturated oil is probably 4 years.
Oh, wow.
So it's hard to get it out of the system. Fructose is still coming in carbs and glucose, and those combination over a period of time, I think that's what I came up with. Here was my crime, because I came up with a model of inflammation and a nutritional model of inflammation. I'm very proud of it. I came up with it. So fructose, refined carbohydrate, polyunsaturated oils. That combination's a perfect storm. Impossible to do a double-blind controlled study over a lifetime.
Yes.
It's a theory. However, we take the seed oils out, take the fructose out, take the carbs out, and most people improve. As it turns out, you can also take out the glutens and lectins as well, and actually improves things as well, as long as you keep the micronutrients coming in. So in an imperfect world, you could get away with just eating lots of fruit, remembering that modern fruit today is different from ancient fruit, and it's got lots of chemicals on it, and it's been stored fruit. There's been a lot of chemicals. And I don't know, have you read Joanna Blythman's book called Swallow This?
No, but I did a lot of research on glyphosate and the fruits, as well as even organic compounds. They use a lot of the natural fertilizers. They're pretty toxic. And then how all the fruits are bred into these really large, very rich, high fructose fruits, because it's much sweeter. And I mean, it drives sales.
And drives sales and also improves shelf life.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So if you can cut the fiber down
I didn't
in
even
fruit,
think about that.
then it will actually improve shelf life. So because I mean, you go back to a piece of bread. A white piece of white bread will last longer than a piece of grain bread before it goes moldy. I have for diabetes, I actually have a piece of toast, white bread. Actually, it was a raisin bread. So that I put in the toaster, because I think that's my diabetes talk. It's on YouTube again. About the Maillard reaction, about this is what happens when the food goes brown. That's actually what's happening in your brain and your eyes every time you're having glucose. So I have had one piece of bread toasted in the top drawer in my office for 5 years. Hasn't gone moldy.
Wow.
So therefore, what I'm sort of saying is that when you take the fiber out of bread and it's just left as bread, highly processed food, it doesn't. You've seen those pictures of McDonald's hamburgers.
Yes.
There's one in Iceland, which is a live stream of the last hamburger made in Iceland. So you can go on YouTube, look up McDonald's hamburgers at Iceland, and there's a live stream of a video of it's completely boring, but nonetheless of a hamburger which still hasn't gone rotten, or the story of a hamburger full of sugar, which is then found underneath the seat of a car, and it's still there. If it hasn't rotted, I mean, the modern vegetable. If you grow your own vegetables, we can bring a lettuce in or a cabbage or something, and if you take it out of the garden, 4 hours later, it's wilted.
Yes.
Whereas the lettuce you bought at the shops, which I don't eat anymore, but nonetheless sit in the refrigerator there for 2 or 3 weeks, still looking crisp. Well, something's gone on it, which I didn't put there.
So if you were to put and I know it's really difficult and it's very individual, but if you were concerned, is it more the fructose we should reduce, or is it the seed oils that you think? So when I say seed oils, I mean like canola oil, soybean oil, etc. Or is it really hard to say it's one or the other?
I think the combination is we've evolved with fructose in our diet for millions of years, but it was seasonally available, and it was more tropical. And when fruit was available in a temperate climate, it was very seasonal when sunlight was around. So we've had fruit in our diet. We've had fructose in our diet for eternity because we're animals. So clearly that didn't affect our evolution. Excess fructose, certainly excess glucose, like the grains and the cereals, that's all agricultural revolution stuff.
Right.
That's really only been the last 5,000 to 10,000 years. The seed oils have been the final thing on top of it, and they, I think, highly inflammatory in combination. But so you can get by with a higher fructose intake, understanding that drives behavior. Do you need it every day? Definitely not. Do you need seed oils? Definitely not. Now, sure, they're the essential ones, but there's so small amounts that we require. You'll get them in a diet anyway. So it's really that combination. So if we need to get rid of one thing, seed oils, number one. Need to get rid of another two things: excessive carbohydrate and certainly excessive sugars. And is fruit good or bad for you? Well, it's not necessarily bad for you, but it's definitely not good for you. That's a slight language twist there, but that's
Yes.
and it's certainly not as good for you as it's made out to be,
Right.
either in nature as it's advertised or commercially as it's advertised.
Yes. I have a lot of uncles that are diabetic, and so they switch all to fruit. And so they're still on their diabetic medications. They limit all the different types of carbs, but they find that when they eat fruit, it spikes their glucose. And the interesting thing is that half of the fruit is fructose, so it won't even be measured when you're checking your blood glucose. It won't be showing up all of it. So we don't know the harm. Do you think fructose is only damaging? And I think you brought this up because you said it's also the liver and other things, but yes, it affects our behavior by driving us to get more hungry, but are there other consequential things? I guess you brought up the liver and fat, non-alcohol.
It's part of insulin resistance.
Okay, just
so that insulin resistant state affects every organ of the body. And the metabolites of fructose, with those small dense LDL particles, end up in every blood vessel wall in every organ of the body. So yes, it affects everything because the end product actually is, there it is. And uric acid, which is a byproduct of fructose metabolism, again via nitric oxide, affects every blood vessel, every organ of the body. And throw the seed oils in, which then affects the cell membranes,
yes,
as well as every blood vessel wall and every mitochondrial membrane, we're totally screwed. So yes, our modern diet ends up in an inflamed state in every blood vessel, every cell membrane, every mitochondrial membrane. So yes, fructose by definition, and with the modern diet, which has got seed oils there, which hang around for years, ends up everywhere.
When you say nitric oxide is beneficial for us, can you explain just a summary view of like what is the importance of nitric oxide?
Well, nitric oxide is a very simple molecule. Nitrogen, oxygen, just very short half-life, microseconds, just milliseconds. It's very, very short half-life. And there are three forms of it. There's one in the blood vessel, in the blood vessel walls. There's one for the brain. There's one that's related to our immunity. The glycocalyx, which is the biggest organ of the body, there's a little one which no one ever thinks about the skin being the biggest organ of the body. The glycocalyx is the lining of the blood vessel. So it's very much like a shag pile carpet. But what it does, it allows the blood components, the little red blood cells, to flow along. It gets pushed along. So that creates a sweeping mechanism through our tiny vessels. The glycocalyx secretes nitric oxide. That nitric oxide opens up the blood vessel in front of it, again, just for a tiny fraction of a second. So therefore, by literally releasing nitric oxide, it allows a blood vessel to actually pulsate and then allow the flow to go through. Nitric oxide, when it's inhibited, doesn't allow the blood vessels to expand or dilate. So nitric oxide, if you have a release of it, it actually raises your blood pressure. So nitric oxide is a thing which is used in a heart attack. So you can actually, nitroglycerin is the same sort of pathway when you have that sublingual or underneath your tongue to actually open up your blood vessels for your heart. So that's exactly the same thing. Erectile dysfunction is treated with nitric oxide to give you an erection. So that's how Viagra works. But effectively, that's nitric oxide. Now, fructose is metabolized to uric acid. Uric acid inhibits the formation of nitric oxide. So fructose slows up blood vessel flow, increases hypertension. And we've got a whole lot of people who actually just drop sugar and their blood pressure comes down.
Yes.
Literally, instantaneously, literally stop their sugar, they come off their antihypertensives, literally within a week or two, because their blood pressure is better controlled. It also has an integral effect. The other forms, one which actually affects the brain. So again, if nitric oxide to the brain is critical, we maintain our circulation to our brain because it's the most critical organ. So if you in fact inhibit nitric oxide to your brain over a long period of time, we're only talking a tiny amount, but a small amount over a long period of time, it's the water torture technique, it ultimately has an effect. Then you've got the other one, which is actually related to immunity. So that nitric oxide is probably how white cells migrate into a damaged zone. So the white cells are our immune cells. And when they get to it, so the body will call it, that there's an area of damage, the chemicals are released which attract white cells to that area, but the white cells have got to migrate into that tissue. They'll release nitric oxide, which actually opens up the tissue, just like it does the blood vessels, to allow the nitric oxide in there. Again, if you inhibit it, you decrease your white cell function, particularly that neutrophil function. And that's actually been done with glucose as well. affecting what's called the neutrophil phagocytic index. Study done 40 years ago, and just literally that a 50-gram dose of glucose had an effect on phagocytic activity for around about 5 hours. So what do we do when a person wakes up after an anesthetic? We give them chocolate, orange juice, white bread, a biscuit, all of which is laden in glucose and fructose.
Right.
At the one time, I need them to have really good immunity. And so therefore, they're actually waking them up and giving them something which slows up circulation, raises their blood pressure, and affects their immunity. This is, again, it's just biochemistry. Stop doing it to my patients. So my patients after anesthetic, took me years, are allowed to have cheese and soup because I've got enough patients that are actually following a low-carb diet. And so when I come into hospital, what am I supposed to eat? And I said, well, bring your own food. Bring in a bit of, cheese, bring in a bit of, bring in a little, cold freezer bag and bring in some nuts and all that sort of thing. And I've helped manage kids with, and I'm not, come after me medical board again, where parents of children have been in hospital with out of control type 1 diabetes, being fed hospital food. And I say, just go out and buy ham and cheese for them and put it in a freezer bag and just literally watch their blood sugars come under control.
When I first learned that sugar inhibits the immune cells, like you mentioned, I thought it was crazy that a lot of the cold medications, they add sugar so that the kids will be able to drink it better, but it's doing the opposite, right? It's not supporting the immune system. And if anything, it's actually worsening the immune system. And it's so unfortunate because, and then on top of that, they add like red dyes to these medications, and it's just horrible. But
this is why I've been flabbergasted, but I've been in this state of now, bemusement's too mild a term, frustrated's another term,
right.
Whereas medical profession can do better, but it means challenging what's been, challenging the paradigms. And, for instance, I'm following the guidelines. I say the guidelines are for the average person. The average person now is actually metabolically unwell. So the guidelines don't just throw them out. Individualized patient care. Actually spend some time with them. And if they're metabolically unwell, and then you can go and stick one of these glucose monitors on them. They vary in cost, but they are just the most powerful tool in education. And nobody can ever criticize me for then individualizing patient care. I realise I'm an orthopedic surgeon talking about metabolic health, but nonetheless, I can see the practical side of it because orthopedic surgeons are biased towards solutions. And people will laugh at us and say, oh, broken bone will fix it. But nonetheless, metabolic health, let's fix it rather than band-aid it. Right. Because I don't want the patient to come back again. That's just an interesting journey.
Thank you for all of this. I mean, it takes people like you to change the corporate narrative. And what I believed was healthy was 12 years of eating plant-based. And when my mental health was declining, everything was sort of breaking down for me. I never once thought the diet was an issue. I always thought it was I'm broken or I was wired wrong. And then when I finally learned that it was a diet, I mean, that's why I became an advocate, because I don't want anyone to ever suffer. But it took people like you and people like Tim Noakes to share for us to then be able to have this opportunity to learn and then try it on our own lives. And then people share their stories of healing that can then do this grassroots movement in a sense to help people that get the privilege of this information to save their families and to have a full life, which I feel that every human should have the opportunity to have this full life.
But here's the joy for me. You're empowered now. You're doing something with all of this information, which was being held back from you.
Right.
It held you back. The information was held back from you. Your health was being held back from you. You've taken it back, and that's for a long time. I'd lost the joy of medicine because I couldn't see it. But the joy of medicine is actually teaching and actually passing on that information. And you go, okay. And so I've been empowered by that journey and hammered along the way, but I'm being empowered because of it. You're empowered by your own journey. And, may you continue on that pathway. Good luck to you.
Thank you. Where can people find you? I'll link to all of the video discussions and lectures you brought up about on YouTube, but where else can people find you?
So a lot of the lectures are on YouTube. Okay. I'm mostly on Twitter nowadays under Gary Fettke or Fructose No. And Facebook, I don't tend to do too much on at the moment because I found was getting a bit censored as time went on.
Yes.
I'm on Instagram, but I actually don't understand Instagram, so I'm still so mostly on Twitter, and I'm doing a fair amount of these sort of podcasts where we can actually support you and your listeners and followers and see where they're going.
Okay. And then, just if you had any words of encouragement or advice to the people listening and watching for everything we've kind of talked about. I know you've brought up empowerment. Once you have the knowledge to do the things for your own health, any words of wisdom you want to part with?
Oh, look, I've really summarized it with those nutrition guidelines. To the best of your ability and circumstances, eat fresh, local, seasonal, whole food, based on your culture and environment, reducing added sugar and processed food. And the other thing, I've come is once you see this, once you see the results, you can't unsee them. And if you're ignoring the results around you, then get out of my way. That's really where it's come from, the health side of it, because we can turn around metabolic health, not for everyone, but for the vast majority of people. You can turn around diabetes. You can give people back control. So you just can't. That's why I'm still on this journey, because I can't unsee it.
Right.
And here, I heard your story today, and I'm aware of that. Wow, here's someone who's did what she thought was doing right, the right thing, got on the fast lane to poor health, turned it around. That's it's another N=1 story. So powerful. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been an honor and a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to sharing this with our community. So thank you so much again.
Well, and we'll try and get Belinda to come along and have a chat to you as well.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that as well. So thank you so much. And thank you for everything you are doing to really help our communities get back to optimal health. So thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay, guys, I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. If you are adding fructose to your regimen of meat-only carnivore, I would just consider how much you consider is safe when it comes to fructose. Dr. Fettke talks about that any amount, even 1 gram, can be harmful to the body, to the liver, to every single system, and to the amounts of nitric oxide within our bodies. It can also drive behavior. And so if you have weight to lose and you're struggling with that, maybe adding fructose is not ideal. If you feel a little better, as he talked about, you may feel that sugar high, and you just have to figure out what amounts make sense for you and your lifestyle. There is no one answer for everyone, but we do know from a biochemical point of view that fructose does more damage than anything. The optimal word is excess, and we just don't know what that amount is for every single person. I hope that this 2-part series with Dr. Gary Fettke really provides you more tools to get you to root cause healing. And as he said, if you've been blessed and privileged with this information, use it to empower yourself and heal with the right foods. And then once you heal and are healing, then make sure to share this information with your loved ones so that your loved ones can heal, and then our communities can heal, and we can have a better, hopeful future for our loved ones and our children. That is the day I'm hoping for, and why I'm advocating for all of this information every single day. Make sure to eat a lot of meat, take care of your bodies, because it is the only place you have to live. I will talk to you later. Bye, guys.